Welcome to Simulator Review, helping you find quality flight simulation with the world's most comprehensive listings and reviews of simulators. A warm welcome to episode 24 of our podcast for the flight simulation community. My name is Alexis, and I'm joined by my two colleagues from simulatorreview.com, Andrew.
Hello there.
And Elliott.
Hi.
To our regular listeners, which we continue to accumulate, a warm welcome back. And to anyone listening for the first time, we are pleased you found us. If you're searching for the leading podcast on simulator venues, then you've found it. We do hope you stick around. In this episode, we are going to have a chat about probably one of the biggest events in the flight simulator world for maybe 10 years, and that's the release of Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. We'll have a discussion about it, as well as some opinions from a very special guest who will be sharing his thoughts and experiences of it with us. And we will have a discussion about what it might mean for simulator venues in the future. So keep listening for that later in the episode. First, though, it's our regular simulator news update covering news at simulatorreview.com and in the wider simulator community. And we go over to Andrew for this. Hi, Andrew. What sim news have you got for us for this episode?
Thanks, Alexis. Flight Simulation Association reached out to us the other day, and Evan, it was great to hear from him. And looking at their material, they've got some great community-driven work there. Do check them out at flightsimassociation.com. And Evan's agreed to come onto the podcast as well. So we will look forward to that in a future podcast episode. I'll leave that to your scheduling, Alexis. But it's great to hear from others in the community. And we look forward to perhaps working together a bit in the future. We certainly like the material, the guides and the webinars and the material they've got set out on their website. And some great quality information. It just highlights, I think, within this community of flight simmers, the quality and the professionalism of the material out there is just phenomenal nowadays. We've got the podcast, obviously, today about Microsoft Flight product and just what is available to the simmers at home, and then those skills they can take into sim providers, venues. It's just remarkable. So we thank you for Evan for reaching out, and we do look forward to chatting with him on a podcast shortly.
So great to hear from other groups in the community, and looking forward to having them on the podcast to discuss what they do. So obviously you've had a bit of a look into this, Andrew. Whereabouts are they based and what kind of things do they do?
They're based out in the US, and looks like they're catering to quite a wide range within the community. So the new simmers just coming in, how do you get started, what different things, what is a VFR, what is IFR. They're also catering for the experienced simmers, discounts on products, being able to build or connect with others in the community. And also they've got sort of this connection with the real world side in terms of those who want to build, say, a home setup, for practice and training, and then the other way, transition coming from the simming community into real world flying. So they're really trying to help the two-way flow, I guess, within that community. Importantly, or perhaps more importantly, is they are the organizers of Flight Sim Expo, and this year, September 24, 26 in San Diego. So they put all that together, and pre-registration is available. So flightsimexpo.com is where you can find all the information about that.
Well, I'm happy to volunteer to be our simulatorreview.com man on the ground there, if you're willing to pay for us to go, Andrew.
Look, Alex, I'd be happy to. When we get our first sponsor on for the podcast, you'll be the first expenditure line. So any sponsors out there, please reach out to info@simulatorreview.com. Love to hear from you.
Thanks. Right, well, that's good news this week, and thanks for the update, Andrew.
Thank you.
This week's main topic is a discussion about a significant development in flight simulation, and that is the launch of Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 in August last year. We wouldn't normally focus on flight simulation software as such, but I think it's apparent that it's one of the biggest developments in flight simulation for a very long time, and it has the potential to really impact on simulator venues too. Here at simulatorreview.com, we always value first-hand experience, and that's no different in today's podcast when we talk about Microsoft Flight Simulator. So we're very pleased to have a very special guest for you who has been using Microsoft Flight Simulator and joined to give us his thoughts and opinion on it. By day, our guest is a commercial pilot flying the Airbus A320, but by night you'll know him by his very successful YouTube channel, 320 Sim Pilot. He started his channel a year ago with videos giving tutorials and help to home sim users, reviewing new planes and scenery, and doing live stream routes all around the world. With nearly 180 videos uploaded, he's quickly established himself as one of the top-rated YouTubers for flight simulation, and is now coming up to nearly 45,000 subscribers, which is an incredible achievement in such a short period of time. So, a very warm welcome, and thanks for joining us on the podcast, and great to have you here today.
Thanks for having me on.
Just a brief start. I've obviously described you're a commercial pilot,
Yep.
which is what you mentioned on your channel. We just wondered if you'd like to kind of briefly introduce yourself for the purpose of our podcast, and also let us know what your YouTube channel is focused on.
Cool. So, yeah, I'm a commercial pilot. I've been flying commercially for about 10 years. I've flown a couple of different airliners, but as you said, I'm now on the A320 family. So that's obviously the various short-haul Airbuses and the Neo ones these days as well. And I've got a little bit of general aviation flying experience, but mostly just from my commercial training. And I don't have a whole lot now, and that's something I'm trying to sort of change as time goes on. But my channel is very heavily focused on both Microsoft Flight Simulator and some of the older simulators, so X-Plane 11. But we use both, probably more Microsoft Flight Simulator these days, just because there's often new things coming out for it. But it's a lot of guides on flying the A320 and airliners in general. And I always put a bit at the start of the videos where I say it's not for real world use, but it's for extra context. So the hope is that by talking about what we do with these buttons in the real world and what they're realistically going to be used for, because, you know, you can look up the systems to a lot of these airplanes online if you really wanted to. But a lot of people, the most common questions I get are going to be context. You know, why would we turn this switch on? When would that be? Or how would we fly this procedure in this way or in this airport? Things like that.
And I think especially you'll probably have seen there are a lot more people who've joined into flight simulation with the launch of Microsoft Flight Simulator over the last year. Certainly there are lots of people I know who didn't used to have a flight simulator before, but with the launch of this and the publicity and all the rest of it, there seem to be a lot of people who are then, you know, first time in flight simulator, but then trying to find content about how to actually fly the aircraft.
Yeah, so there's been a notable increase. I started the channel before Microsoft Flight Simulator was out. I actually started it with the recent release was the TOLIS A321. So my channel featured, I got X-Plane, I got the TOLIS A321, and we just made videos with those. And that's where the channel started. And that's pretty much all I did. We then branched it out. We tried out a few other Boeings and so on in X-Plane. But then Microsoft Flight Simulator came along and I put up that first impressions video on the day. And that's where the channel really changed shape. Sort of over the week after that, it went from about, I think we had about 1,000 subscribers, and a couple of weeks later we had 20,000. It was quite remarkable. So there was a huge uptake in interest from Microsoft Flight Simulator, and a lot of, you know, these days I have viewers who are and community members who are avid fans of either or. So that's why, you know, we still do both, because I think ultimately they both serve their purpose. But there's definitely been extra intake with Microsoft Flight Simulator of people who weren't using X-Plane and swapped over, or P3D and swapped over. I think there's definitely fresh faces.
So yeah, I mean, you've obviously been using Microsoft Flight Simulator for nearly a year now, and I was watching that first impressions video again. Certainly the things I picked up from that were, you were certainly very impressed with the visuals, the texturing of the aircraft, the default aircraft that were already in Microsoft Flight Simulator that were included, the scenery, and those things came across quite clearly, that really good positives. Has your experience over the last year changed your mind? Have you kind of picked up on things you like and things you don't like?
Absolutely. The simulator's changed shape so much since then. I think the release surprised a lot of people. It certainly surprised me when we heard it was going into its beta testing, and there was still very limited information, limited screenshots coming out, but it always looked fantastic. But it went so quickly from beta into release. I think it caught which caught me off guard slightly anyway, and I think some other community members as well. But that meant that over this last year, it seems to have been quite intently updated. So we get updates. They feel incredibly regular. I mean, I think they're every 2 weeks, but that varies. But you're finding that they've changed so many features. So recently they added contrails, for example. So a lot of the things that were missing early on have now arrived in various forms. Not everything, and it's still got a way to go in terms of some core features that we like. So flight simulator enthusiasts nearly always want a replay function. Everyone likes to watch their landings back again, obviously.
So I think you've obviously flown quite a range of aircraft in Microsoft Flight Simulator on your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Do you see there being strengths with certain aircraft and less so with others? How do you find that?
I find it's down to who develops the aircraft. So if you're talking about just the aircraft that came with Microsoft Flight Simulator, if you ignore any freeware, any third party, any modifications, then I would definitely agree the general aviation aircraft that came with it felt very complete, because they're obviously more simple. A lot of them shared instrument panels, things like that. So they were quite nice and enjoyable from day one, and you could use those to enjoy the simulator. The airliners that came, particularly the A320, which is the one I obviously know, it looked fantastic, and they'd made a sincere effort to get the PFD and the instruments looking like the Airbus. My issue with it was more that it was pretty much, I hate to say it, but the functionality of it was almost broken. An example would be whenever you went to land at about 30 feet, it would do a sharp bank to the side, and you'd have to sort of fight that. And it an inexplicable sort of thing to happen on final approach. So I can't complain about default aircraft being simple. If it was an Airbus that didn't have even a working FMC, just sort of a basic nav routing or something, then that would be one thing. It was just a shame that it arrived basically broken, and we've seen these glitches get into some of the other airliners. So the default airliners have struggled over the last year. I know Asobo themselves have updated them, however, so that things have improved since then, even if you ignore the mods, definitely. But the general aviation aircraft I found didn't have the same problems. If you're talking about third party and community, then I don't see any limits to the complexity or any issue with having fully fledged airliners in it. We've seen the Aerosoft CRJ arrive, which was built in Microsoft Flight Simulator, I believe, from the ground up, although I know they've built it in other simulators before. But that has fully working systems from day one. When it was released, it had the hydraulic pressures go up and down, the flight controls power and depower. The systems are all there, and I know there's been some concern over whether the simulator can handle it, but I think we're seeing now that it clearly will be able to, as they'll need to add a few more things into the development kit to make sure that it's the more complicated things can be added in. But as they arrive, I think they will be. So I think in the medium to long term, we'll see lots more complex airliners, and obviously soon PMDG will be bringing theirs, and they're going to be very complicated, I'm sure.
I get the impression that I suppose the thing we're missing at the moment is a fully study level A320 or 737 in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So whilst, as you say, the community has picked up and done some freeware projects like the A32NX, we don't really have 737, if you like, which is a very popular aircraft for home simmers to use. Going back to your point about it coming out quite early, I guess the shame is that we have had to wait a little bit for PMDG and Aerosoft to bring their aircraft over to Microsoft Flight Simulator.
So yeah, absolutely. It's hard to believe that we're coming up on a year since release in a couple of months. So that's, when you think of it like that, if you told us when it launched it's going to be a year until you have PMDG bringing their airplanes, we'd have all been up in arms. Oh, I can't believe it. But in my mind, the Flight Simulator released or sort of as a bonus early, and we got to try it early, and then we're going to see this stuff arriving later on. It's taken a little while. I think PMDG have surprised us that they're already bringing their DC-6. I think they said June it should be expected. So this is a good sign that the others can come over, because they've obviously got quite a catalogue of aircraft to move into Microsoft Flight Simulator. Going back to your point on the 737, that's is a ubiquitous airplane, isn't it? It's a part of flight simulation for such a long time, because we've had it. I mean, I had Flight Simulator 98, so the 737 was the first airliner I ever got to try in a simulator. So you can see why it's popular. As you said, we had it by default in FSX. In X-Plane 11, the 737-800 was one of the better default aircraft, and then it's been modded with the Zebo mod to become completely study level. It's an amazing piece of freeware. So seeing the 737 arrive will be very popular, I'm sure. And that would be a fully complex airliner simulated, I suppose. But I would like to say that I think the CRJ already is at that level. The CRJ might not feel very complicated because it's not a very automated aircraft, but I've moved every switch I can find and found it interacting in the ways it should. And I've also found in the A32NX, although it's a freeware mod for the relatively simple default aeroplane, now they've separated it. It's actually a separate aircraft in your library now, which is helping with the stability, I believe. But it's getting features that I haven't seen in other fully fledged payware Airbuses because of the sheer size of the community that's working on it. So I think it has the potential to really be one of the top study level aircraft out there over time. So certainly some parts of it are already getting ahead of some other payware Airbus versions out there.
In terms of things like the scenery and the weather, certainly your initial comments in your early videos about it were incredibly positive, and I haven't seen anything else to suggest otherwise. I think to the point you make about, you can do lots of things in Microsoft Flight Simulator you can't do elsewhere. For example, I've seen people who've done VFR flights at night in Microsoft Flight Simulator, and the roads are there and the landmarks are there. It's something you couldn't really do in the likes of X-Plane unless probably you spent a decent amount of money on some payware software. I mean, those are all things I think are incredibly positive and a great kind of foundation for this simulator to build upon.
Yeah, the scenery package you get is unbelievable. It's really impressive. It does rely on a good internet connection, whereas of course X-Plane and default P3D will just generically fill it, and they know where the towns are, but Microsoft Flight Simulator will give you the photo scenery and then very good AI sort of building up on top of that. So I've done some VFR flights in it and then gone and done them in real life, and it's remarkable. It is incredible. So comparing default X-Plane to default Microsoft Flight Simulator, it's a no-brainer. If you compare, I've got some community members who are big long-term X-Plane users who can put in their updated scenery, and not always payware. Some of them are very good at using ortho, where you can get satellite imagery into the simulator, and then they've got certain programs to get scenery on that. And some of them are getting much closer, and they've got that accuracy out there. But the fact in Microsoft Flight Simulator you have the whole world just streamed down the internet to your simulator it's remarkable. And then when you tie that in with the weather effects, they did have trouble with the icing effects at the start, but that seems to have been toned down. It used to just, as soon as you went into any cloud, you'd just turn into an ice cube. The whole plane would be covered in places that I've never seen ice form on any aeroplane, and you'd hope not really, or they wouldn't be flying for very long. But the weather engine is good. I think it's been updated a lot since it first came out, so I think it looks a lot better now. And as I said earlier, the real trick is that when you're flying VFR low on a hot summer's day and the sun's low in the sky, it might glint off the water, for example. You don't see that so well in things like X-Plane, but in Microsoft Flight Simulator, you get the haziness, you get the glare of the sun, and then you get the reflections off the water just glinting. It all comes together to make such a package. And I think it's the lighting that makes it look so good. But the accuracy of the terrain and the buildings is remarkable, for the whole planet. I can't believe it every time I try out a different country to go and fly in. And what I really like is that the houses in the UK won't look the same as the houses in Italy. I could look at a screenshot and you'll know which part of Europe that's from. It's very good.
Yeah, I suppose rather than having the old kind of generic house appearing everywhere else in the world and the generic tree that appears everywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Something that we've been chatting about between us as well, and that we're interested in, is what sort of setup do you use? So we've noticed there's some Thrustmaster controls that have come out for the Airbus, and they're sort of focusing on just the 320 at the moment, because we do have a few 320 sims in our database, and we have reviewed a couple. Are the Thrustmaster products that have come out for Microsoft Flight Simulator good, realistic?
Yeah, so I currently use the Thrustmaster TCA Officer Pack, they call it. So I've got it's basically the side stick, which is it looks like a reskinned version of an older Thrustmaster joystick, but it was a very popular one. So that's great. It's fine as a joystick. In terms of realism, it doesn't feel like an Airbus side stick to move because it's much lighter. It doesn't have the dampening, but it's a very functional, and I've used other joysticks in the past, and it's as good, if not better, than those. So it's a nice product. It's not going to be usable, if you're building an entire cockpit, you're not going to put it in there. I wouldn't say. The throttles I use are the quadrant that they have, which again, are great in the sense that they look the part and they give you the functionality because you've got master switches, and most importantly for flying Airbuses, you've got the detents in the thrust levers, which makes all the difference in terms of being able to actually obviously set the thrust properly. And I've got the add-on bit which has flaps and speed brakes and things. Again, it's too small to be used in a real serious simulator or a home-built cockpit. If you're going to go to the effort of putting up all the panels around you, they won't work because they're not the right size either. But in terms of functionality, they're great because it gives you those detents, and it has a lot of buttons that you can program. In terms of programming it in Microsoft Flight Simulator, it actually by default works quite well. The Thrustmaster stuff does, because they seem to have teamed up quite nicely on it. So by default, a lot of the buttons were assigned for me. I've had to do a bit of tinkering when using some mods, however, and of course a bit of tinkering when not flying an Airbus, just to get the buttons to work how I want them to. And I will say, obviously, I bought those myself. They weren't sent over by Thrustmaster or anything like that.
Excellent. So what about then for GA? Because again, we've got a few general aviation sims that we've been out to and in the database. Would you use the Thrustmaster Airbus setup for that, or do you use something else?
Yeah, I've got an older Thrustmaster HOTAS 4, which I use is a PlayStation controller. Really, I had that for Ace Combat. I used to use that when I started the channel until I got this Thrustmaster stuff. I do also have the Thrustmaster HOTAS Warthog, which is there's a different price range. It's more expensive, but that's very good. But for general aviation and everything in Microsoft Flight Simulator, I still use the Airbus pack. You can actually remove the detents from the thrust levers, so that way you get your control over the engine, without the detents in the way. So what I've done actually is I've got the right hand thrust lever assigned to propeller RPM and the left hand one assigned to throttle. Just little things like that. Yeah, it's quite customizable, and being able to remove the detents, and you can remove the reverser gate as well if you want. So it's just the whole travel just for throttle.
Yeah, and the nice thing we saw about the Thrustmaster when we had a look at it was you can use it for either hand. There's not many controllers for the left-handed guys out there.
Yeah, it's great. The joystick's good for that. Yeah, definitely.
So we spoke about some of the features. I'm just wondering, there must be new features coming out. Is there a particular bugbear your community would like to see fixed, or something really exciting that's coming up that they're looking forward to, and the one of the many updates coming forward?
Yeah, the big missing feature is still the replay tool. It's particularly useful for me being a YouTuber where I use replays and people want to see replays of landings and things like that. So seeing the replay function arrive is something we'd like. There are, as I said, the community made ones, but they're a little bit, they do a great job, but they're not quite as integrated or as smooth as I'm sure we could get if they made it built into the simulator. In terms of the actual flying in the simulator, there's two things that I've talked about a lot on the channel. It's going to be, for me, definitely the ground handling, the grip on the tires. I'm not sure what the core reason for it is, but anyone who's flown a real aircraft and then tries to use the rudder in the simulator will find it's incredibly responsive. It's like it's a go-kart, so it makes it quite challenging to get a realistic sense of the rudder. Becomes a problem on tail draggers and so on, obviously, quite easily. So that would be one thing. Also, the lateral navigation side of things in the Airbus has been a particular bugbear, but I believe the fly-by-wire team is working on a custom system to sort of bypass some of the issues of the default one. However, it's definitely improved over the last few weeks, that side of things. So those would be my top things that I'd like to see sorted.
So you can see sometime in the future those things will be addressed. It just may take some time.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm sure the replay tool is on the way. I don't know when, but I know that's been heavily requested by the community. The ground handling is a bit of a different one. I'm not sure if that's going to be up to each developer to solve for their aircraft, or whether that'll be a core simulator change or not.
I suppose this speaks very much to the overall impression, and the one I got was that this is very much a work in progress, and it is a fantastic scenery engine. It's a fantastic flight engine. But some of this content in terms of aircraft, in terms of improving functionality, improving the flight controls and dynamics, that's coming, and it's coming with some of the freeware projects and will come with some of the payware things. But especially once we see those coming in the next year, this will be a fantastic, fully functional simulator.
Yeah, I can definitely see that happening eventually, and it's as you said, it's taking time, but it will get there. And seeing as we've already had fully fledged airliners put into it, I think there's going to be plenty more coming, and over the next few years we'll see it really mature.
And I think just to bring this back into, I suppose, our focus in terms of simulator venues, we've talked about this ourselves in some of the previous news updates in our podcast when Microsoft Flight Simulator was coming out, which was when we were going to see the first venues with it. I suppose my impression is that it may be a while, especially with the airliner jets, so primarily the A320 or the 737, which we see mostly in our database. What's your kind of sense of when we might see that?
That's a good question. When I don't know. I don't build cockpits myself, so I know that they obviously need a lot of interaction between the hardware and the simulator. So it depends how much information you can extract from the simulator. So judging from the only side I see from it would be the way I stream with it, and it's been quite good from day one with its ability to send out information like your airspeed, vertical speed, and so on, which gives me optimism that it shouldn't be too far of a stretch of the imagination to see it then integrating into more complicated hardware, such as your autopilot control panel. But again, that's going to rely on the functionality of the aircraft. So whether running a simulator on it would be a good idea or not will all come down, I suppose, to how, firstly, the quality of the aircraft, and then after that, we're going to need to see the simulator have the capability to send that information and interact freely with the different programs that are going to be required. I mean, we're getting the airliners now over the next sort of year and a half. So that's a good start. Whether we'll see simulators use it, I would love to see it. I think it would look amazing in sort of some of the larger full scale simulators with wraparound screens and so on. Because as we said, the scenery, the lighting is definitely on another level. I don't know. I don't think it'll be in the next couple of months, put it that way. Especially with it being updated so frequently, it's obviously change is never going to be good for someone who's built a whole simulator around a certain setup. So they're not going to want to have it constantly changing in the background because that will constantly upset the hardware. So I would imagine that's going to be, it will need a bit more stability before it will be an efficient use of time to make a simulator with it.
Yeah, you picked up on exactly the word I was going to suggest, which was stability. And I don't think we are quite there yet with it. Obviously, we don't have a 737 either, which is the most popular simulator we see in our directory. But you're right. I think once we get those, and once it becomes a bit more stable and less prone to changes quite so often, I'm sure we will. And as you say, I think just looking at the visuals on your channel, imagining that in a full wraparound screen and some of the simulators we've seen, I think that will be absolutely spectacular, especially for something like a GA aircraft, which we don't see too many of, but the ability to use that and fly VFR and have great scenery, I think will be a real change when it does happen and when we see that in venues.
I completely agree. And going back to flying the airliners, for the experiences for people who are doing it for the fun of it, as opposed to using a simulator for the commercial purpose. Because obviously, if you're going to go to a simulator to practice your IFR holding or whatever, you're going to be looking at a white screen anyway. But if you're going to be doing it for the experience, the great thing about Microsoft Flight Simulator is it can deliver those real gasp moments as you break out of the clouds and the sun's beneath them and they're turning orange in the sky above you, and you see the lights of the runway up ahead and the lead-in lights. It's really fantastic.
Great. Well, a good discussion there about Microsoft Flight Simulator. Thanks to Andrew and Elliott as always, and a very special thanks to 320 SimPilot for joining us and giving us his time to share his really valuable experience so far with Microsoft Flight Simulator. And if people want to get in touch and follow you and find your content, where can they find you?
Yeah, so of course on YouTube, if you just search for the channel 320 SimPilot, and I've also got a website which has links to the videos, a few sort of structured playlists, the liveries if you want to download those. So that's 320simpilot.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And as we say, it's certainly one of the channels that I think we all watch fairly regularly on YouTube, and got some really excellent content on there. And
thank you very much.
Nice to see some reviews and first impressions of new aircraft on Microsoft Flight Simulator as we enter this exciting period with this new game.
Yeah, it's come a long way.
So there you go, an interesting chat about Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. It certainly seems to be something that will change simulation both at home and at the simulator venues we review significantly over the next 5 to 10 years. What do you think? Have you immediately gone out to buy Microsoft Flight Simulator? If so, how did you find it? What things did you like? And was there anything you didn't like? Did you feel it was worth the money? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so do let us know. Also, if you're into flight simulation and really looking for great content on Microsoft Flight Simulator and other simulation software like X-Plane, we really do recommend you take a look at 320sim Pilot's channel on YouTube. So just search for 320sim Pilot in YouTube. In our next episode, it's time again to have a look at another of the Bluepin featured review simulator venues in our database. And to remind you, these are the ones we have visited in person and done a thorough review on. This time we'll be looking at airline experience at Fair Oaks Airport in the southeast of England and their 737 fixed base simulator. If you've listened to episode 23, you'll have heard us review the sister simulator company at Fair Oaks, which has a fixed-based single and multiprop GA simulator. We'll be having a chat about the venue and our review and letting you know what we thought about airline experience, so I hope you'll join us again for that in 2 weeks' time. In the meantime, subscribe to our podcast on the podcast service of your choice. We're available on Apple, Google, Spotify and quite a few others, so whichever one you use, you should be able to find us. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a star rating and review. Any 5-star reviews will be read out on the podcast, and we really appreciate your feedback and support. For now, though, it's goodbye from me, and goodbye from Andrew.
Goodbye.
And goodbye from Elliott.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to the Simulator Review podcast. We would love your feedback, so please do comment and rate us. Please follow, share, like and subscribe on all our social media channels, where you can see regular updates on new simulator listings and reviews, as well as our latest articles. Until next time, happy simming.